Hello, this is Dr. Ron Klatz, President and founder of the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, with another episode of Immortality Now. And I'm very, very happy to have as my co-host Carol Petersen, pharmacist extraordinaire, expert in hormonal replacement therapies, and Dr. Valter Longo from University of Southern California. He's also with University of Milan. He's the founder of the breakthrough product Prolon, and an expert in the effects of therapeutic fasting. And there is perhaps no better time to talk about fasting than now, with the political issues taking place in society of food shortages and supply chain imbalances and inflation. So maybe a little bit of fasting is not such a bad idea. Welcome to our interview today, Dr. Longo.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'd like to just add one more thing. Dr. Longo is the author of the Longevity Diet. And I'd like to give the long title too: Discover the New Science Behind Stem Cell Activation and Regeneration to Slow Aging, Fight Disease, and Optimize Weight. So thank you, Dr. Longo, for joining us. Where should we start? How your book has probably made a big impact on everyone. Do you have a question? You want to start with a question?
Yeah, let's start with a question. Dr. Longo, just basically for our listeners, maybe you could explain what therapeutic fasting is and just a little bit of a history, how far back this goes. I mean, this is as old as medicine itself.
Yeah, so fasting has been used for thousands of years in some form or in very different forms by lots of different people. It's very common in most religions. But I think it's probably only about 100 years, 150 years ago that it started being used as a therapeutic method, especially by physicians. And so I think that fasting, this fashionable fasting, comes around every 50 years or so, and then it goes away every 50 years or so. And why is that? Well, because we use words like that, fasting, and I always say it doesn't really mean anything. It's like saying eating, right? It's the opposite of eating. So whether something is therapeutic or not, and it is about how long you fast for, what you fast with, and why you fast, and who is fasting, right? So all of that, I think this new fashionable moment needs now a transformation so that this can now move into standard of care with FDA, not necessarily always the FDA, but certainly with the FDA either approval or blessing. And I think it's probably the time for this to happen. Whereas in the last 3,000 years where fasting was used, I think it probably did more damage than good from everything we're seeing, right? So most of the improvised fasting that we see actually makes you live shorter and causes a lot of problems,
Well, that's right. Yeah. Fasting has been reported as beneficial, at least in our circles. Fasting has been reported as being beneficial for health, longevity, immune stimulation, sometimes cancer therapies. And what's the difference between healthy fasting that's going to increase life expectancy and dangerous fasting?
Well, I mean, the devil is in details. So I think that this is why in the book I introduced the concept of 5 pillars. So basically I'm saying the days where we can just say epidemiological data suggests this, so we do it like that, I think are over. And now we need to move into, what about clinical studies? What about basic research? What about centenarians? How can we put it all together and come up with a common denominator? So for example, 16 hours of fasting that include skipping breakfast are consistently associated with a shorter lifespan, more cardiovascular disease. But 12 hours of fasting are not, right? So 12 hours of fasting seem to be very beneficial, not as beneficial as the 16, but beneficial and not associated with negative epidemiology, right? So does it mean that 16 hours is necessarily bad? No, because you could do it for, let's say, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, go from weight A to weight B, and then move to something else. So I think in that setting it's fine. But if you told somebody, for the next 20 years, do 16 hours of fasting and skip breakfast, then the epidemiology is very clear. Now we have meta-analysis, not just a few studies, but many studies, all agreeing that not a good idea. Now, it could be something else about skipping breakfast, but certainly it's not a good start.
Dr. Longo, please, you hit a really raw nerve there, because people are recommending 16 modified fasting, 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours fast a day. As a matter of fact, I could probably name 10 nutritionists who are on the internet who have wide following, and physicians too, who are recommending intermittent fasting. And you're saying that this is a dangerous event, not a healthy event. Could you make that a little clearer? Because you just said something that just boom.
Yeah. So I think, again, the difference between 12 hours, no problem, right? I always say I've never seen a single negative study about 12 hours of fasting every night. As you get to 14 and 16, you start seeing, particularly if you're skipping breakfast, but also without. So, for example, gallstone formation and gallbladder operation, risk goes up twofold, right? Between people that fast for 10 hours a night and people that fast for 16, 18 hours a night. So, so there are multiple, from multiple sources now you see association with problems. Again, it does not mean that a doctor that says, okay, from January until March, I get you on 16 hours, and then I'll move you to something else. That's probably beneficial. So if you do it for a short period and you're trying to achieve something acutely and then you move out of it, I've never seen, most of the studies short-term like that are positive, right? So this suggests that there's not a problem.
Is the issue missing breakfast? Is breakfast the critical issue, where if you have a breakfast you can fast no problem? Or what's the critical issue there, and how long can you safely fast during the day? And is there a benefit with regard to blood sugar control?
There's a benefit for all these fasting practices. 12 hours got benefit, 14 hours got benefit, 16 hours got benefit. Now, if the 16 hours involves skipping breakfast, that's when you start seeing the problems, right? So if the 16 hours involves skipping dinner, we don't know, right? There's not enough data, but there's a lot of data on skipping breakfast, which is what most people do. But if you just look at, let's say, 3 months or 6 months of 16 hours, the results are actually pretty good, right? So nobody's arguing that short term you could do it and it might improve your blood glucose, it might improve your weight, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is long term, right? As you start doing this for years and years, now you're starting to see the negative association. We don't know why it is, but we suspect that ketone bodies, for example, are a double-edged sword, right? So they could be beneficial, but if they're too high all the time, they could be also detrimental. And so now, if you do 16 hours every day, it could be that the ketone bodies are too high all the time, and for maybe a year or two, that's okay. If it's 20 years of that, may not be okay anymore.
So your Prolon product of foods has 3 meals per day, and you're only doing this 5 days at a time. And you suggest just doing this periodically. You don't have to do this in a continuous manner of any sort. Why is that? Is that enforcing maybe more long-term fasting of any sort is detrimental to you? It's better to do a short burst like your program is? Yeah.
Again, we're trying to go with what medicine has been all about for a long, long time, right? So standardized, multiple clinical trials. So now these fasting mimicking diet have over 10 clinical trials associated with them, where everything is standardized, always the same. And so the evidence, both from the mouse work and the human work, is that if you keep the fasting mimicking diet for 5 days, you seem to get the benefits of fasting without getting some of the problems of fasting. First problem is feasibility, compliance, right? So most people, you go more than 5 days, they're not gonna do very well. And then there's a safety issue, right? You go more than 5 days, most clinics around the world that do fasting will argue you need to come to the clinic. And also then there is a metabolic issue, which is, we know from lots of studies that if you fast for long enough, or you calorie restrict for long enough, and this is an old New England Journal of Medicine paper, if you go, let's say 800 calories for weeks and weeks and weeks, eventually your metabolism slows, even adjusted per body weight, right? So let's say your body weight goes down 10%, your metabolism might slow down 18%. And that's a problem, right? So now you're basically condemned to regain the weight. And sure enough, that's what happens, right? You lose weight and then you regain all the weight. And there's many papers showing that. This is why most people cannot sustain long-term severe restrictions. And fasting, of course, is the most severe of all. So now you have a double problem. Let's say that you do 3 weeks of fasting. Now you have a dual problem. First of all, you gotta probably go to a clinic to do it. Then probably you're setting up yourself to slow down the metabolism. And then, when can you do this again? Maybe a year from now, right? 3 weeks. So we're saying probably not such a good idea. Best to be able to do it at home, do it safely, if needed under doctor supervision, keep it 5 days, keep it fasting mimicking, avoid the safety issues, the feasibility issues, and the metabolic slowdown. And in fact, when you do it like that, it seems, at least in the mouse work, it's harder to figure out in humans, but we have evidence for the same. It seems, if anything, the metabolism may be accelerating a little bit and not slowing down.
So we were talking about your work with cancer and diabetes. Are the clinical trials you're doing at Prolon related to that at all, or is this separate research that you are working on right now?
Well, they're all, many of them are fasting mimicking diets. Now, I cannot talk about product names, but you mentioned that. But yeah, so there are different fasting mimicking diets. So for regular people is one, and that has multiple trials. And then in people that are relatively healthy. And the cancer one is a different FMD, is shorter and lower calories, right? So we're trying to achieve in 4 days. Instead of 5 days, it goes to 4 days. And it's lower in calories. And we've seen in now many clinical trials in the cancer domain that's probably a better idea. Now for metabolic and cardiometabolic, we're moving into a lower sugar, even lower starch version that we think is going to be more beneficial for people with diabetes, pre-diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular risk.
In order to achieve maximum autophagy from a longevity point of view, from a beneficial effect on longevity, how long do you think, what does the data show you as far as the length of fasting, and should it be a complete fast or should it be a modified fast? What would you recommend?
Well, obviously, if it's modified fast, we strongly believe it should be a fasting mimicking diet, because if it's a modified fast and let's say you have proteins in there or you have sugars in there, it's going to probably block autophagy or certainly interfere with autophagy. So if it's a fasting mimicking diet, it should allow autophagy to occur. And this is why we don't stop at day 1 or day 2. We go for 5 days. So probably around day 3 or 4 is when the heavier induction of autophagy genes is going to happen. So now you fully turn into a ketogenic mode and the system is starting to break down. And that's probably where the high level of autophagy is happening, let's say, after day 3.
One
last thing. In order to in order to break the diet, can you go off of your fasting back to your normal diet, or do you have to have a day of or 2 days of modified, caloric intake?
We recommend a 1 day of a transition diet, and so the transition diet is usually low in proteins, no animal products, or low in animal products. So just have a sort of a easy diet for the digestive system, so that there is not strain placed on the digestive system. And this is what most clinics that do therapeutic fasting use. They use this transition back into, so it's just 1 day of a normal calorie to low calorie, mostly vegan, vegetarian type of diet.
So your fasting mimicking diet does not contain animal products. What would you say about animal products use in general in your book? Some of your ideas are parallel to your own upbringing in Italy, where meat was served maybe on Sunday and not every day with the meals. What would you say for people in general eating meat? Is this life extending or not? Is it actually a detriment to us?
Well, it's pretty clear, especially the red meat, and now it's a risk factor for lots of different things. So pretty clear that if you consume lots of red meat or processed meat, that's a problem. If I go around the world visiting lots of people, lots of centenarians, from Okinawa to Sardinia, Calabria, Loma Linda, and they all have the same in common, right? They usually are pescatarian or vegetarian. Yes, they used to have red meat, as you pointed out, maybe once a week on Sunday, and some of them. I always remember, one or several actually, that I asked the question, how often did you eat red meat when you were 50, 60, 70? And they had to think about it for a while. And one lady responded, she was like 104. And she responded, oh yes, one time I had red meat. I broke into a wedding, I crashed a wedding, and I was able to have some red meat, because they might go 20 years without seeing any type of red meat. So yes, but the Mediterranean diet certainly allows for some red meat and some white meat. I think the longevity diet that I described basically says probably vegan plus fish seems to be the best way to go. And I think the new study that came out of Norway just a few months ago confirms this with 13 years of life expectancy increase, high legume, high cereal, high nut, no red meat, no processed meat diet. So now we're saying, if that alone and some other things that are associated with 13 years life expectancy increase, if started at age 20, what if we add the fasting mimicking diet? What if we add the 12 hours time restricted eating, and some of the other, like this age specific consumption, let's say low protein up to age 65, and then you go to a moderate protein intake, you increase the variation or the type of foods you eat after 65. So all those things, I think, are bringing these 13 years closer to probably 20 years of increased life expectancy. And so that's pretty extraordinary now, having these numbers from millions of people, 3 continents, suggesting that this is real. It's not just an idea anymore, and it's not just about the Mediterranean diet. Yes, the Mediterranean diet is okay. It's a good diet, but it's not, let's say, an anti-aging diet.
What in your travels? You're traveling around the world, and you're looking at these blue zone people, and what stands out to you besides diet with these people? I mean, what do you think? What has really hit you as something that's worthy of additional research that hasn't really been acknowledged in the media right now?
I think it's been acknowledged, but in a different way. I think we hear about exercise all the time, and none of them exercised, but all of them, pretty much close to 100% of them, have the same story. I used to be a farmer, I used to be a shepherd, and so the great majority of the centenarians we talked to had very physical jobs, and they're used to be out there and doing, physical work, and so I think that the exercise is fine, but they had their own version of exercise, and that seems to be probably pretty important to get there, because you don't get too many people saying, "Oh, I used to stay home and sit around all the time, and now I'm 100 years old."
So you're not running into a lot of accountants and office workers in the blue zone areas?
Very few, right? Very few. So lots of them, they have stories of, "Oh, I used to be in the field for 12 hours a day," or "I was in the war, and we used to be in concentration camps. We had to work 16, 18 hours a day." I mean, lots of stories like that. Not too many stories of So for example, not too many doctors, right?
Just
I rarely meet a doctor who's a centenarian, which is interesting, right? You're thinking should be lots of doctors, right? Not too many. Not too many.
Nope. Doctors tend to pass off early.
Too many drugs,
Too many drugs.
Are you noticing any? Are you seeing any research to support any drugs that mimic fasting? Metformin was reported for a long while as being a drug that might have some beneficial effects in its ability to modify glucose metabolism. Is there anything else that is coming to the fore, or is there any news on metformin that you would like to share with us?
I think metformin's got the potential. Is certainly acting on the nutrient signaling pathways and nutrient signaling genes. So it's got potential, and near Barzilai and others are set out to test it in lots of people. So we'll have to wait and see. Rapamycin, of course, is the other one, but rapamycin causes hyperglycemia, so I doubt that's going to go very far. So people are looking for rapalogs, so are there other TOR inhibiting drugs that, could have benefits with side effects? So I think that those are interesting and promising. My favorite has been the growth hormone receptor antagonist, and so we've been working with John Kopchik for a while, and why is that? I think that we've been following the little people of Ecuador for 20 years almost now, and these little people they lack the growth hormone receptor, so they are protected from cancer, diabetes, cognitive decline. So they seem to be very much like the mice that have growth hormone receptor deficiency, which have the record longevity extension. These little mice live 40% longer. And so now it's interesting, right? You have this parallel between the mice and the humans. Now we don't know how much longer the humans live, but we suspect they live longer. But they're certainly free of most chronic diseases. And these have been observed for a long, long time. So my favorite drug target is the growth hormone receptor. And John Kopchik is the one that discovered a drug with FDA approved. It's called pegvisomant, and to be used for acromegaly. So now it's interesting, right? Because so we're very interested in what about an oral drug? Could we have an oral drug that is a lot less expensive, maybe than pegvisomant, that everybody could take, and maybe have less risk that than some of these other inhibitors of signal transduction pathways like rapamycin.
Well, that is interesting. Yes. Growth hormone is a very interesting story. It seems that it helps. It's kind of like it's an anabolic hormone, obviously, and it helps build muscle, helps build immune function, and so many positive things. But over a long period of time, perhaps in old age, lower levels of growth hormone may, in fact, be beneficial, as you say. The story's yet to be written, I'm afraid. I hope that we learn more about these things. Are there any other drugs that come to mind, or any other any other observations you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment about growth hormone and IGF-1. Now, keep in mind that, for example, when we do fasting and fasting mimicking diet, growth hormone signaling IGF-1 goes way down, right? And that seems to be very important for stem cells to be activated and then to be ready to regenerate. But the regeneration happens when growth hormone and IGF-1 go back up, right? So now you have the two opposite effects, both necessary. One to break it down and be on standby, and the higher one to be rebuilding, right? So if you don't have the rebuilding, you just got half of the job, right? So this is why this is the mechanisms, the molecular biology is still very, very important in this understanding of growth hormone and what it does good and what it does that it's bad, right? So yeah, obviously it's both good and bad. You just have to learn how to make sure that it's used for the right condition or for the right job, let's say, and not high all the time. Like insulin is a great example, right? So, if you looked at insulin 50 years ago, you could have said, oh, insulin is the greatest thing in the world. It does a lot of great things. And it does, right? But then eventually you get insulin resistance. And that's a nightmare, right? So, yeah, so I think growth hormone is probably an IGF-1 are probably in the same category. It just, insulin is good. They're good, but you just have to learn how to use it and when to use it. You cannot just have a lot of it all the time. So, yeah. So then your question was about other drugs.
That's a very important point you make about growth hormone, and thank you. Haven't heard that put so succinctly before, and I believe you're correct. It's going to be a biphasic benefit that we're going to have to learn how to modify and modulate appropriately for anti-aging purposes.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about other drugs.
Yes, other drugs. Certainly David Sinclair and others have been working hard on the NAD-related drugs, and so I think that soon enough, I think they're going to move into clinical trials, and let's see what the data shows, and is it for aging or is it for specific diseases? So we'll have to wait and see, but certainly there's a lot of interest in that. And spermidine, I think, is another very, very good one, and Frank Madeo's work, and I think is one of the most promising one. It's out of wheat germ or some other plant-based sources, so unlikely to be detrimental. The doses are relatively small, like in the milligram range, and Frank and colleagues starting to have a lot of good data and clinical data, and so I think that's looking very promising, and maybe a front runner among the new drugs that are available out there. So yeah, again, we have to wait and see more data, but I really like spermidine and what Frank and others have been shown in animal studies and in the initial clinical studies.
How long do you think we can expect to live in health and vitality, given the technology that is in the pipeline right now, and given your exposure to these long-lived populations? If you were to have full access to all the technologies that are available today or in the pipeline today for yourself and for your friends and colleagues that are, you know, your age, how long do you think the maximum lifespan might be?
Yeah, so let's talk about median lifespan, right? The average lifespan rather than maximum, because but the median, I think there's going to be two groups, and they're already there, right? They're already existing, and there's going to be one group, maybe, I don't know, I'm guessing 500 million people that are following everything, right? And they're getting it right, or very close to getting it right. And they eventually, considering what I just said, is 20 years of increased life expectancy. So if they start everything correctly early enough, let's say at age 20, 25, 30, but even if, you know, if they start later, it might not be unreasonable to think 110 as an average lifespan, right? And then you're gonna get group B with 7.5 billion people that they're just all over the place, right? They follow whatever they want. They take 100 pills a day or whatever it is that they do, and they're probably gonna live shorter than they live now, right? So that's probably the reality. Of course, you know, overweight group in the United States surpassed 70%. In Europe, surpassed 50%, and it's getting worse and worse. But certainly, the confusion is getting higher and higher in nutrition, and not just in nutrition. So I'm imagining that, yeah, people are going to have to find, you know, the right sources and the right conferences, right, to go to get real information, solid information, multi-pillar information. And yeah, and I think if you get the right source and you get the right group and you start listening to them, you're going to do very well. And I think if you say, oh, it doesn't matter, everything is the same, it's very confusing, every day they change. And by the way, you know, since the Walford year, I used to be a student of Roy Walford, who's an MD at UCLA, and we haven't changed very much, right? The story, we tweaked it considerably, but some of the general ideas are still there. So then, yeah, we will argue that now we're getting to a pretty solid position because of these multi-pillars. And hey, I would recommend people to find a group you trust and stick with it, because that's going to make a big difference. And in prevention, lifespan, but also in therapy, you know, so lots of these things that, like what we're doing, for example, we're using it for aging, but we're also using it in treatment of diabetes, in prevention, in treatment of, let's say, risk factors of cardiovascular disease, cancer treatment. So I think that this ability to remove damaged cells and components and replace them with healthy ones is going to be applicable to not just prevention, but also treatment. So yeah, so I think that 110 average, but only for the very careful one picking the right instruction book, you know.
Well, thank you, Dr. Longo. Really interesting information, and I applaud your work. Please keep us informed and up to date with what's going on. For the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, I'm Dr. Ryan Klatz with my co-host, Carol. Thank you for joining us, Carol. And we'll end with another episode of Immortality Now soon. God bless you all, and wishing you all a long and healthy, happy, fruitful life.
Thank you.
Thank you.